Steinbach Community Outreach started when I was teaching at the SRSS. There was an at-risk program there, and I was teaching that. And the first time I ever heard about somebody being homeless was when somebody walked into my classroom and said, I haven't eaten in 4 days. And so when I asked why, it was because he had no place to go for night. And so that was my very first exposure to somebody being homeless in our city. After that, we started a food program at the school, and then after I retired that position, I had so much stuff in my garage eventually of donations and things. My church says, why don't you take this one room in our church and why don't you run out of there? And that's how Steinbach Community Outreach actually started. It was quite apparent when we were working that it was necessary to have another step, another resource in our town. And so then the emergency shelter, Today House, came about. Through Simon Penner and Alan Penner, we had some meetings and some discussions, and so Today House came about, and that's been in existence since October 2012.
We chit-chatted, we brought in our children too into the conversation because we felt that what they did in their lives, they could all be a part of helping us to get going. So when I called Irene with the brainwave, I said, so then we kind of figured out, oh, well, who could we have with our steering committee? From steering committee, we incorporated, went to board, and we haven't looked back. Sometimes I feel like we have to prove that there's homelessness in Steinbach. Sometimes I feel like we have to justify what we're doing. And I always think, well, even if we've helped one person in a month, we've helped one person. I don't think there's any justification to give hope to that one person.
The people that we do help are those that have had circumstances that are beyond their control and that they have become homeless because of it. It is not the typical type of homeless that you see out there, let's say in Winnipeg or Toronto or Vancouver. It is more families and individuals that have had issues and they have found themselves to be without any funds in order to have a place to live.
My name is Al Weeb, and I lived in Winnipeg, but I have a major history going back to Steinbach. My dad was raised here. My grandparents lived on Mackenzie Road, just down the street. My aunt and uncle, my favorite aunt and uncle. I spent all my summers in Steinbach on Mackenzie Road at my aunt and uncle's and my cousins out here. Well, I grew up in a normal home. My dad was actually a pastor, and so, you know, the thought of homeless, we were always secure. The thought of homelessness would never ever enter my mind. It would never be a thing that I would think about. When I was a kid, I used to play the trumpet, and we would go down to Lighthouse Mission and Union Gospel Mission on Saturday nights or Thursday nights, and my dad would preach, and I would play my trumpet or sing and to the homeless people, and that was my first introduction to it. But you know, of course, you never think that you're ever gonna be in the same position as these people. As a child, as a teenager, as a young parent, and as a person who made literally millions of dollars in his life, the thought of homelessness would never even be a remote thought, not at all. Al Weeb was a advertising and sales executive who basically had one focus, and that was his job, and to make as much money as Al or I could. My earnings were in the six-figure range. My life was my job was my life. I was a single person. I had no focus but my job, and I was a lonely, very lonely person. And I was thinking about work 24/7. The minute I got in the door and finished making supper, immediately I would think about my job and what my targets were going to be for tomorrow. What changed? The fact that I lost my job. I was let go, and my world came crashing down because I had no other life besides my job. The day after I was let go, hopped on a plane and got as far away from Winnipeg as I could. I actually went to London, Ontario to visit my brother, and that didn't go well either. I didn't want to be around people, and I had a plane ticket to go to fly back to Winnipeg, but I hopped on a train instead, and what I did was I booked another ticket past Winnipeg. I just wanted to go to Vancouver and not come back to Winnipeg. And so that's what I did, and I ended up staying in Vancouver for quite a while, and got back to Winnipeg at Christmas. And I had a good time. I spent, I can't remember the exact dollar, but it was somewhere between $28,000 and $30,000 within that time frame. And it was just, I was staying in $500 a night hotels and trying to escape from the reality of the situation and just make things as easy as possible. By around March, end of February, beginning of March, my money was just about out, and I was spending $1,200 a month just to live in my apartment, so I knew that wasn't going to go on very long. So what I did is I walked away from all my furniture, I walked away from everything. I had seen this place in my travels around the city. I used to eat at a place called Mama Pho's on McPhillips, and it was a little Vietnamese place, and right in behind there was a auto wreck shop, Diaz Auto, and I ended up, and I knew there was a bunch of cars in the back, so I ended up going to that location and scouting out the cars in behind in the back lane for a place to crash. And I found a Mercedes, 60 some odd Mercedes that was just a major wreck, and irony, this is like, I used to own a Mercedes, and so I ended up crashing in this Mercedes, which had some busted windows, and but it was a place out of the elements, and that was a lot better than a lot of people who are homeless. I ended up making that my home. There are many, many moments of desperation. Myself in particular, I did not, because I was too proud to use the shelters. I was too proud to use the Agape tables for breakfast or lunch. I was too proud to stay at Shalom for shelter. I'd made $100,000. I don't need those places. And so after a while, it became, every moment became a desperate moment. My state of mind began to crumble in a big way, in a big hurry. And what I did for food, because I refused to use those places, was I collected beer cans and collected change from the drive-thrus at McPhillips in Notre Dame. There's a Burger King there, there's a McDonald's there, there's a Tim Hortons there. I was really lucky that there were actually 3 places that I could run through a couple times a day and collect some coins from. But by the same time, after about 2 months, my self-esteem was pretty much crushed. And this is where we talk about self-esteem. Self-esteem is the thing that goes and takes sometimes years to recover. I basically had zero self-esteem after about 2 months. I lost myself, and it was so difficult. I got to the point where if I ever thought about the desperate place I was in, I would start getting suicidal, because I knew that there was no way out of this. In my mind, I had no idea how I was going to get off the street. Because I'm diabetic, my body was really breaking down. I could hardly walk anymore. Yeah, my feet just ache so badly all the time. And because I'm also diabetic, it affects the person mentally. And I was clinically depressed, unchecked clinically depressed. And add that onto being diabetic, things were a real mess. And I decided to give the hospital a shot, and they did not seem to pass my homelessness and didn't take me seriously, and saw that I was actually very suicidal. And what they did was they let me go. I received absolutely no help. So I went back to my car for the night. This was on a Saturday. And I stayed there for the night, but I'd made up my mind that I was ending my life. And I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to get out. And so I decided I'm going to jump off Cinnamon Park Bridge because there's a great undertow there and it'll take me away. So about 2 o'clock in the morning on the Monday morning now, I jumped off the bridge. I got on the railing of the bridge and more or less fell in instead of jumping in. And I was waiting for the undertow. That never happened. And I started floating back to the surface, and instead of taking a gulp of water or just swallowing it, and something stopped me from doing that. And eventually ended up on the bend of the Assiniboine River where it turns about a quarter mile. That was a long time. I'm not a good swimmer either, and I'm very fortunate to end up on the banks of the river. I stayed there overnight and slept on the banks overnight, and I went back to my car, and the next morning I was just aimless, totally aimless, and I collected some change, and I thought about, let's go try St. B. Let's go to St. B. And so what I did was I had enough change for a bus. No money for food or anything, but I had enough change for a bus, so I took a bus. There's 2 bridges going across the St. Barnabas, and I was making sure that I actually got there. And so what happened was, and this is where it gets emotional for me, because she walks in, she obviously looked at my file, and she said, "Al, you've been to this hospital 3 times. You've been to this hospital. You've been to clinic. You've been here and there. And either nobody wanted to help you, nobody could help you, or they didn't do enough to help you." But she says, "But I am going to help you." And it's, she said, it's like you lost your way, you've fallen off the edge of the world. And I've repeated the story a lot, but she said, "But I am going to pull you back in." And she made a motion with pulling on a rope. And she said, "You've lost your identity. You don't know who you are anymore. We're going to help you find yourself." And she said, "Today is the first day that you're going to start rebuilding your life." She said, it's going to take, not, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen next month. It's going to take a long time, but you're going to come back as a stronger person than you ever were before. And today we're going to start that process. Today I'm working with the Institute of Urban Studies at the University of Winnipeg, and work with the homeless population in Winnipeg, and trying to do an outreach work, working on the streets, and seeing what we can do to help the population here. I'm also chair of the Lived Experience Circle in Winnipeg, which is a peer support group made up of formerly homeless people who do outreach and do what we can to maintain the focus on homelessness.
Besides helping people that are already homeless, we also help those that are at risk of being homeless. Because we're more well known in our community now, people are phoning us before they become homeless, and so we are possibly able to manage having them not become homeless in a bit of a better way. So using a bit of a more proactive approach.
Well, when I was 17, my dad kicked me out, and I lived in the Sally Ann in London, Ontario, on and off for about 2 years. It was kind of a really crappy circumstance, not knowing where your next meal was coming from. And then I actually met my husband, and that's kind of how I ended up not being homeless anymore. I've been with Joe for about 8.5 years, been married for 7.5 now. We have 2 beautiful children. Gaden is 7 and Rowan is 5. I never thought it would happen a second time. I mean, with my kids, I never expected to ever have to be that way. And honestly, I thought that our family would be better than they were, but they weren't. And so it was really hard for us to think of the fact that, hey, we're going to be homeless and we have nothing. And, you worry about CFS with your kids and all the other complications that come with that. So it was really difficult for us. We moved back to Manitoba from BC, and we came to a house that my mother-in-law had acquired for us. And when everything started to melt, we noticed that there was a really nasty smell, and so my husband, being a plumber, went down into the basement and noticed that there was mold everywhere. And my youngest has asthma, and he was starting to get really couldn't breathe properly. So my husband talked to his dad and said, "Hey Dad, can I come live there until I can find another spot to live?" And so we went to his father's house, and unfortunately his father is an alcoholic, breakfast, lunch and dinner kind of alcoholic. We decided it wasn't a safe place for our children. So Joe ended up going to the Today House, and he was there for about 5 days. And I was in Agape with the kids, and it was probably the hardest thing we've ever had to do because we were separated. And putting the kids to bed and saying our prayers over the phone, I don't want to cry, was probably one of the hardest things we've ever done in our relationship. And the kids really were hurt by the situation. But we're really grateful that we had places to be, and we had somewhere to get supper. And Joe had an amazing time at the Today House. He actually told me all the time about talking to the house parents and getting to hear these wonderful stories of where they came from and how they got there.
Before we we had a year in our shelter life, although our shelter life has been short. We had not quite a year where we had volunteers as house parents. And until we had found volunteers, we as a board took on the role of actually being house parents. So when there was a guest at the shelter, we took turns going to the shelter and being the house parents overnight. And I think that that was probably the biggest eye-opener for me. Although I can sit back and I can chair a meeting and I can say, oh, well, I think to actually experience, to sit and visit with the homeless, those experiencing homelessness, visit with the guests and hear their problems, and they're so vulnerable, so vulnerable at that moment, and you become vulnerable just as much because it's just, I think what I found is that we gave them shelter, we gave them food, we gave them a sounding board if they wanted to, but we walked away with a whole lot more from that experience where it just, I don't know, it brings the big picture down to quite a big reality when it comes to what they're going through. Most of us have a lot of hope, continuous hope, and that's what they want, and that's where we need to just keep helping them.
Dignity is something you don't have when you're homeless. You do not have dignity when you're homeless. You lose your self-respect. Dignity to me today is respecting people who are homeless. It's really hard to explain. When you're on the street, you lose everything. You lose self-esteem, you lose dignity, you lose self-respect. And dignity is a really strange word for me because it's something that I've had to fight for. You cannot have dignity unless you have self-respect and self-esteem. And once you're homeless, it takes a very long time to get that back. And when you are homeless, it's just something that is out of the question. For me, it was out of the question.
You yourself become very humble. It just brings you right down to, to almost your knees to realize what these individuals have gone through, what they are going through, what they want the same as we do. Just always that knowing where your next meal is. Nobody ever wakes up in the morning thinking, oh, well, let's just pick today to be homeless. Life circumstances are very interesting. And so because we are blessed, we need to just give back.
Homelessness happens in Canada, that it's not just something that, there's a bum on the street or somebody with mental health issues, that it happens to people, that it's not just a stigma, anybody can be homeless, anybody can end up in our situation, and people need to realize that it's not just a stigma, really, honestly. I never thought it would happen to me, but it did.
There has to be empathy for the people on the street. they all have souls, even though you stereotype them and you look at them with some disdain, perhaps because you don't know the situation. But I found that they are people just like you are and just like I am. They have issues, and I think that they have to be treated as and respected as individuals. And when you're homeless, you're not treated with respect. And if I could change anything, I would change the way people on the street are treated and somehow give them respect that everybody deserves.